Hello everyone, I'm Carlo, GDE for Flutter and Dart, and I will talk to you about animation in a Flutter application today. So, as I was saying before, everyone's like animation inside the application. Basically, when you see a well-done application, sometimes the, the game changer about an application without animations and one with animations is a big difference because an application can be well done, but an application also needs to be enjoyable by the users. How Flutter handles the animations? We have a lot of ways to use animation in our Flutter application. The most common one is the implicit animation, and the implicit animation will be the focus of this talk because it's the easier way to do animation. It's the basically out of the box mode for make animation with almost zero effort. Then we have the explicit animation, the low level animation, twin animation. Basically, each step is more complex than the one before that, and but it gives us greater control on the animation itself. The last one is the third-party framework that we won't see today because it's like Rive, for example, that give you greater degrees of animation and control, but it's not included in the framework directly. When someone has to choose between animation, usually it lands on the Flutter website animation page, and this is what you will see because, as I said, there are an incredible amount of option when you want to decide how to animate your app. But the biggest part is I should use the implicit or the explicit animation. Let's see together. Basically, what are the PowerPoint of the two methods? The implicit are immediate, usable by the user. Basically, when you create an implicit animation, you directly see how it behave, and it's really easy to use because most of the time is just a change in a parameters where you change a boolean just to say now these should animate to the other state, and it's incredible fast. Most of it is already done by the Flutter team. You in most cases have to do nothing to implement an animation, and in the same effort you write the code, you basically have your animation ready. But nevertheless, you have a great effect on your application. Some sample of these are the animated container or the animated opacity or the animated offset. Basically, you just change a parameter of one of those and you see the animation effect in place. Then we have the explicit animation. The explicit animation give you greater control on what the animation should do. Basically, you may need to do more code with the explicit animation, but you can control basically pixel by pixel how the animation behave. These enable you to do some pretty complex animation because you can decide the timing, you can decide the direction, you can decide basically everything. And it can be more tunable in terms of your application because with the implicit animation, you have to deal with some constraint because it's require more effort by the developer. Some example of the explicit animation are the twin animation that animate between a value and another value, the size transition that can help you change the transition of a widget, or the rotation to control its rotation along various axes. So let's make a concrete example of what we want to do. Imagine that we want to animate a login screen. We should have several states. Basically, we start from the normal page and we should animate to an attempt login. We then animate to a success or failure of said login, and then we can go to the next screen in case of success. And all those animation needs to be able to revert to any state, because for example, after a failure, I may want to go back to the try login stage, and after I navigated to the next page, I may need instead to go back to the login if I, for example, after a logout, for example. Let's see how we can do that. This is, it will be our screen. Basically, a simple screen with my logo, my username and password, and the login button. After I insert the values, I want to tap on login and have the login change from the login button to the loader indicator. Then, in case of success, I want to show a big check mark on the screen with a green background, or a big X in the middle with a red background in case of error. Then the next step should be from the success or error screen, I need to navigate inside my content, or I need to navigate outside in case of failure. Which, which option we have to make this happen? Basically, we can go to the UI catalog of Flutter on flutter.dev. You can see the link on the top of the page, and we will have all the animation available for us. Most of the screens that I told to you can be done with the animated container. The animated container is a widget, and I introduce you to the widget of the week. It's basically a YouTube video series by Flutter that show you everything you can do with that widget. So we will use the animated container that you are now seeing on the video of the widget of the week. Basically, we just change the parameters of the widget. For example, we can change its color, calling by set state, and the widget will handle all the rest. Will handle the change, the duration, the interpolation. We have an incredible amount of property that we can change. And this is done with 1-2 line of code. We just need to define a couple of things. For example, one of the things that we should provide our animated container is the duration. The duration is defined by the duration variable type, and it could be done as little as a couple of milliseconds, but of course, I never recommend a fast animation to be less than 500 milliseconds, or it will be almost unnoticeable, but it can go up to days, hours, and so on. If we want to exaggerate, we can make an animated clock, define an animated duration of 12 hours, and have the clock simply rotate the bracket in 360 degrees in 12 hours. It's an extreme case. I don't recommend this approach if you want to animate or create your clock app, but it's just to show you how versatile can be the duration type. Then we have to choose a curve. The curve is how the animation will behave during the time. The most simple one is a simple linear curve, but if um, you have several possibility of choose. You can even define your own curve, but if you go into the curves class, you will find several options already out of the box. Those are my favorite. Basically, the elastic in out simply bounce in and out before settling down. The bounce in will bounce at the start, but then goes into position, or the curve elastic in will make like a small traction before going into position. So, what we can animate with the animated container? Basically, every property of the animated container can be animated in an implicit way. We can change the size, like the width or the height, the color, the corners, the background color, the elevation, the shape. For example, if we have a box, we can make it a circle. We can add or remove borders. We can change padding and margin and so on. So, if you remember, we had a login button that we wanted to be animated. Let's see how I managed to create said button. First of all, the duration. As I said, we needed a duration to have our animated container work. This is a mandatory parameter. If you don't provide a duration for your animated container, you will have a compile time error because this is required. Then we have a curve. You can experiment live because leveraging the hot reload, basically, you will see immediately how your animation behave. So if you want to experiment, you just change the curve right at the moment, and you will see the difference between all the various sample. And then we have the rest of the widget. Let's see what we do with this widget. First of all, we define a margin, and the margin will change between 0 and 32 in case of the result of our network call it's loaded or not. Then we will also change the size. For example, our button will be larger as the screen if it is loading, if it is already loaded, or it will be a smaller size if it's still loading, or we have a default state, for example, before we tap on the button. And then again, this is true even for the height. And we have our decoration that define the shape. In this case, the shape will stay the same. We just change the border of the button and the color. Basically, our button will be green if the success is true, or if we don't have the success, we check if we already finished our network call by the loaded parameters, and we will define the color red if we already attempted the login but we didn't have the success, or still green if we still need to try the network call. Then here we will have later our content of the button. So this is my try login fake call. Basically, what it simply do is changing the status of loading from false to true when you tap the button, and the success will be alternatively one time success, one time not success, just to see the different result without implementing a complete network call. Then if it's still loading, we launch a future delay that basically is the way of Flutter to say, just wait for some time. And after 2 seconds, we will give the user the loaded completed status. And then if we decided that this was the success call, we navigate to the main screen. Otherwise, we will revert the loaded state. This is where we start the loading, the future that I just described, and let's see the result. Basically, we alternate from the status. So let's see how. This is the failure state and go back. So let's see it another time. From a default state, we tap, we will go into loading after 2 seconds, such as, or in the opposite case, we go into loading after 2 seconds error, and then we revert back. As you can see, in few seconds, we created basically an already pretty much complex animation that with Android native will be more or less complex to handle. In this case, we have our button already doing most of the work just with few line of code. Then let's go to the content of the button. For the content of the button, I chose a stack. The stack is a widget that enable you to have two separate layer, one above the other. Then I want the following. If the widget is loading but still not finished to loading, I want the indicator. Basically, this is the state when I tap on the button, I start the loading. The loading is not yet completed, and I want to show a circular progress indicator. Then we have the state for the base state when we are not yet loading and we didn't complete the loading. And in this case, I just show the login text. And this time we have, in the loaded case, just an icon with the check mark in case of success or the close icon in case of failure. Let's see the result now. As you can see, the animation now changed between all the values, but something is a little off because basically the icon appears suddenly still out of the screen because the button is not big enough to contain it. And we have this ugly transition between all the values. How we can solve that? By using the animated opacity. The animated opacity is another widget that we can use for implement implicit animation. Basically, we want to have a widget that animate between two values of opacity. What we can just do is wrap it in an animated opacity, again, define a duration and the opacity of the widget. The widget then will animate anytime the opacity is changed between the two values. Let's see in the code. Basically, we take this widget and the circular progress indicator specifically, and we wrap it in an animated opacity. When the state is what we want, we animate the widget with opacity 1. We simply set the value of the opacity 1 in the case we want it visible, and 0 when we want it not visible. Basically, just we changed where we have our logic of our check. So the check of loading and loaded is now inside the opacity with a ternary operator. Then I inserted a curve. In this case, the curve is to have the animation not starting at the start. Basically, if you remember that I said you can have some custom curve. In this case, I have a curve that I define as interval. The interval should be from half of the animation to the end of the animation. So basically, if the animation duration is 1 second, like in this case, the first 0.5 second, the animation will do nothing, and for the other 0.5 second, the animation will do its animation. We can also describe a parent curve in the interval that will handle the actual curve. If you don't define it, it will be a linear curve. In my case, for this animation, the linear was perfect, so I left that in this way. And then, as usual, the duration and our child of the animated opacity. So basically, we swapped that line with this new widget. Let's see the result. I did the same for all the widget, and then we have a smoother animation because the widget will animate also internally its state, and we don't have anymore the icon appearing out of nowhere. And I could have changed something when animating back, but I actually liked the icon dropping down like it was cleared. If I wanted to avoid that, I simply had to add an interval that ended before the end of the animation for the icon. So we almost have done everything that we attempted to. The only thing that we need to do now is to animate from the state of suches to the next screen. Because basically with 30 line of code, we already created the whole animated button, the first suches and error phase, but then we need to animate to the second page. As you can see, I said to the second page because in case of error, we already animated everything because by using implicit animation, each animation will be played to the according state. So what's happened in this case? That when we reset the values, the animation will automatically revert its values and we will go back to the normal state. So we just need a little effort to animate to the next page. Or we need a hero. You may have been familiar with the hero animation in Android. Basically, the hero animation is when you have a widget in one screen and you want to animate it to a different screen. This is done with the hero animation in Android, and this is done with the hero widget in Flutter itself. So we need to use a hero. The hero is incredible easy to use in Flutter. Let's see how it can be used. Basically, we simply wrap our widget with a Nero widget. It can be two different pages, and then it will be animated automatically. Let's see how. This is my detail screen. Basically, we have the our animation that will go to the second screen. I decided even if this should be not done, that our animation will animate to two completely different widget because I will animate my button to my up bar. The documentation says that you should try to animate two hero widget on the most similar possible way, so the same widget in possibly the same tree, but I wanted to test its limit, and put my hero inside the scaffold of the other page into the app bar. So basically, I wrapped my app bar with the hero widget, and in my previous screen, I had a hero widget that was basically the background of our application wrapped inside the hero. So after the suches, we animate the background into the second page. When we simply call the navigator push of the our screen, we navigate to the second page. I'm not doing anything different from calling the navigator.push. This will navigate our screen, and the hero animation will do the rest. I revert the state of the previous value in case I wanted to go back to the login. Let's see the final result. This is the final result. Basically, I tap on the widget I have the suches, and I navigate to my animated app. As you can see, the screen will now change to complete the app bar and then back in a seamless way. So this was my talk about animation. I hope you liked it, and if you have any question, you can ask me, and I will try to reply you.